Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. So, we're looking at a completely fascinating, highly complex, and honestly pretty surprising chain reaction unfolding across North America right now. When we hear the phrase international trade war, we usually picture steel, aluminum, auto manufacturing, right? We imagine politicians in Washington and Ottawa going back and forth over billions of dollars in manufacturing. But what if I told you that the escalating 2025 to 2026 US-Canada trade war is actually triggering a massive looming crisis involving the literal garbage sitting out on your curb? No way, right? But today, we're going to trace the incredible ripple effects of this geopolitical standoff, taking it all the way from the absolute highest levels of global finance straight down to the local landfills of Ontario and Michigan.
To really understand the scale of what's happening here, we kind of have to start with a big macro picture. $4 trillion. Take a second to process that. That is the staggering amount of value wiped out of the U.S. stock market right after the March 2025 announcement of tariffs by the Trump administration. We're talking 25% tariffs on steel, aluminum, and autos. This move effectively threw a massive wrench into a $700 billion bilateral trade relationship between the U.S. and Canada. Investors panicked, major equities like the Dow just nosedived, and the economic fallout was, well, immediate. But here's the thing, this financial shockwave, it was just the very beginning of a much deeper structural mess.
Let's map out just how fast this whole trade war escalated. It is wild how quickly things move. Okay, so March 4th, 2025, the initial U.S. tariffs snap into effect. Fast forward just 10 days later to March 14th, Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, is sworn in, and boom, he immediately slaps a waiver 25% retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods. This tit-for-tat dynamic spirals out of control rapidly throughout 2025, and it culminates in these completely unprecedented border threats. By February 2026, the U.S. is literally threatening to block the opening of the newly built Gordie Howe International Bridge between Detroit and Windsor. This timeline is a perfect and kind of scary illustration of how fast a formal trade agreement can devolve into physical bottlenecks right at the border.
Section 1. The Michigan Trash Pipeline. Okay, let's dive into this. We've talked about those big macroeconomic tariffs making all the headlines, but now we're going to pivot to a really surprising microeconomic vulnerability getting caught right in the crossfire. We're talking about municipal solid waste, the garbage pipeline.
And the scale of this vulnerability? It is absolutely staggering. 3.44 million tons. Every single year, the province of Ontario exports a massive 27% of its total waste directly into the United States. Now, you might be wondering, didn't they stop doing that? Well, while major Ontario municipalities technically stopped shipping their municipal waste stateside back in 2010, the province's commercial and industrial businesses absolutely did not. So literally day in and day out, massive fleets of trucks are carrying millions of tons of Canadian trash straight across the border just to be buried in American soil.
So where exactly is all this trash going? Well, look at the giant blue slice on this chart. Over 14% of all the trash dumped into Michigan landfills comes directly from Canada. It highlights the heavy reliance on this Ontario-Michigan waste corridor. If you add in waste from other U.S. states, nearly 1/5 of all the garbage buried in Michigan is imported. Crazy, right? Michigan has historically been the go-to destination for Ontario's commercial waste, absorbing this incredible volume that Ontario just flat out cannot manage at home. But that begs the question, why Michigan?
That brings us to Section 2, the economics of garbage. To answer why Michigan is the primary dumping ground, we really have to look at the cold, hard financial logic driving this cross-border pipeline. Because hey, whether we're talking about microchips, auto parts, or just everyday municipal solid waste, supply chains always follow the path of least resistance, and, more importantly, the lowest cost.
Just look at the sheer economic disparity in these state-levied landfill tipping fees per ton. Over in Ohio, they charge $4.75. Wisconsin is way up near $13. And Michigan? Just 36 cents. Literally pocket change. This incredibly low fee is driven by a huge oversupply of landfill space in the state, and it creates an absolutely irresistible economic incentive for Ontario waste managers. I mean, think about it. It is vastly cheaper for a commercial business sitting in Toronto to load their trash onto a truck, drive it completely across an international border, and dump it in Michigan than it is to deal with it in their own backyard.
And it's exactly like this quote from the Whitmer administration points out. That tiny 36-cent fee has literally made the state a magnet for Canadian trash. The economic pull is so strong that waste shipments from Ontario to Michigan surged by 31% between 2012 and 2016 alone.
It hit nearly 2.7 million tons back then, and obviously it's grown to that massive 3.44 million ton figure we just looked at. But, and this is a huge but, this highly efficient, hyper-localized supply chain relies entirely on one thing, a frictionless border. Which leads us to Section 3, border squeezes and pushback. As the broader USMCA trade war tensions we talked about earlier start spilling over into local politics and infrastructure, this invisible pipeline of trash is coming under some intense pressure.
Right here, we're seeing the messy collision of local political pushback against constant, desperate demand. Over on the left, you've got local Michigan sheriffs actively cracking down on overweight trucks hauling Canadian waste. This really reflects a deep, growing grassroots frustration from the communities actually living near these massive, ever-expanding landfills. But then, on the right, look at the sheer resilience of the demand. Local officials pointed out that even during the strictest 2020 border closures, when actual people couldn't cross, the trucks full of Canadian trash just kept right on coming. The demand from Ontario is absolute. There's no backup plan. But the political tolerance over in Michigan, it is wearing dangerously thin.
Which leads straight to this kind of direct policy action. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer is actively proposing a huge hike in the state's landfill fee, jumping it from 36 cents all the way up to $5 per ton. And look, this isn't just about raising revenue. It's an explicit, targeted goal to curb out-of-state waste, specifically to stop Canadian trash. So you add this immense, localized legislative pressure right on top of the broader retaliatory tariff war already happening between Washington and Ottawa. Basically, the border is actively squeezing this trash pipeline shut. Section 4, Ontario's local landfill crisis. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is it answers the question, what happens when the music stops? Let's pivot and look at the severe domestic consequences for Ontario if the U.S. border effectively closes to their garbage, whether that's from trade war blockages or Michigan just completely pricing them out. Here is the ticking clock. According to Ontario's Auditor General, if the province stays on its current trajectory of waste generation, it's going to completely run out of landfill capacity in just 9 to 14 years. Let that sink in. By 2032 or 2035, at the absolute latest, Ontario's domestic landfills will be entirely full. The province generates over 16 million tons of waste every single year. Without that Michigan relief valve we talked about, all that trash has literally nowhere to go. They desperately, and I mean desperately, need new capacity in their own backyard.
And desperation leads directly to highly contested local solutions. Take the Dresden controversy, for example. Step 1. A company called York One proposes a massive regenerative recycling and waste facility in Dresden, Ontario. We're talking a site capable of handling 160,000 metric tons of construction and demolition waste. Step 2. Premier Doug Ford's government steps in and introduces Bill 5. Step 3. This bill effectively lifts rigorous environmental assessments for certain waste management projects. The government is essentially trying to slash red tape to fast-track domestic waste capacity before their entire system collapses. But, as you can imagine, fast-tracking a massive landfill creates immense local friction. The community backlash in Dresden has been absolutely fierce. Residents are looking at the prospect of up to 600 trucks rolling through their community every single day. The Walpole Island First Nation has actually joined the legal battle against the site, pointing to some very real environmental risks to sensitive waterways. On top of all that, Bill 5 has sparked a full-blown constitutional challenge. Environmental groups are arguing it creates law-free zones by removing municipal veto powers and crucial environmental safeguards. So, Ontario is totally caught between a looming trash crisis on one side and intense, organized local resistance on the other. Okay, Section 5, the USMCA ripple effect. Let's zoom back out to the macro level for a minute. We've seen the bursting landfills, the local protests, the constitutional challenges in Ontario. But how does this all connect back to the USMCA and the tariff war we started with? It all comes down to the fundamental nature of integrated markets. Check out this excerpt from Kristen Silverberg's Business Roundtable report. The report explicitly warns that predictable, tariff-free access isn't just some nice perk, it is the fundamental backbone of deeply integrated North American supply chains. The USMCA was designed to create economic confidence. So when a trade war breaks out and emergency tariffs get slapped on compliant goods, it doesn't just hurt the targeted industries like steel or autos, it completely erodes the credibility of the entire border system, affecting literally everything, from automotive logistics down to the daily crossing of municipal solid waste.
And this perfectly illustrates a concept called the negotiated balance. It's the careful, fragile equilibrium of cross-border trade agreements. When you start throwing around emergency tariffs, like those 25% retaliatory tariffs we saw in 2025, or when you threaten to block major infrastructure like the Gordie Howe Bridge, you shatter this balance. The disruptions just compound. A tariff on steel angers a trade partner. That leads to tighter border inspections. Those inspections trap a fleet of garbage trucks. That forces a province to bypass environmental laws to build emergency landfills. And that sparks a constitutional crisis. It is all connected, like one giant, messy puzzle.
Which leaves us with this final thought to wrap up today's explainer. We rarely think about where our trash goes until it suddenly has nowhere to go. Today, we've seen how high-level geopolitical tariffs in Washington and Ottawa inevitably trigger a deeply localized structural crisis for waste management in Michigan and Ontario. So, if a trade war can collapse the invisible pipeline keeping our cities clean, you really have to ask yourself, what other hidden essential supply chains are currently teetering on the brink? Think about it. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.